Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, April 18th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Texas game in 134 days, the game against Michigan in 225 days. If you're planning your next event, make it unforgettable with Grateful Griddle, Columbus's favorite food truck, serving up smash burgers, gourmet sandwiches, and good vibes. Book your catering today at gratefulgriddleoh.com. A brief housekeeping note before we get started. We are officially heading into the college football off season, so that means you are going to get fewer Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning shows during a typical week. We're going to take weekends off unless there is news. There's almost always news this time of year. So probably you're going to get basically as many shows as you normally do. But just want to give you a heads up. If you don't see a show, nothing bad has happened. I'm not trapped on anything heavy. It's just we do this every year this time of year, and sometimes people forget. So don't worry. We will have plenty of shows. Transfer portal's open. We're going to have plenty of stuff to talk about. That's actually one of the things we're going to be talking about on today's show. We talked about the transfer portal, a couple Buckeyes entering the portal. We'll talk about that with our buddy Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. We're also going to be talking about some college football rules changes that the NCAA Playing Rules Oversight Panel approved this week. Some rules that people getting rules named after themselves, which is either a very good thing or a very bad thing. So we'll be talking about that in a minute. But Tony, let's start with the transfer portal. I don't want to oversell this, but a couple Buckeyes, both former walk-ons, have, in fact, already entered the transfer portal following the Ohio State spring game this week.
Yeah, receiver Reese Stocksdale and punter Anthony Veneri. And they both have some interesting, I guess, history, and from what we've seen of them, our most oft remembered and mentioned images of Reese Stocksdale have always been working with Marvin Harrison with the Monarch machine, where we'll be doing the post-practice or post-interview podcast on the indoor at the Woody, and those two would be there religiously catching passes, feeding the machine, catching passes. And so, this gives Stocksdale an opportunity to go and play. And we've seen that happen before with other Ohio State walk-on receivers. And then with Veneri, I would say he was the most consistent punter that I saw in the Friday practice before the spring game. And he's the guy that came to Ohio State last year to compete for the job, and it didn't go his way. So he's a guy with experience, 2 years as a starter at Buffalo, I believe. So both of those guys, I think they'll be able to go somewhere and play.
Yeah, both guys you feel like they at a lower level program, absolutely have a chance to see them start. You look at Reese Stocksdale, and I'm sure you were thinking about Sam Wiglusz when you were talking about that earlier. Sam Wiglusz was a former Ohio State walk-on who went down to Ohio University and then turned into one of their leading receivers for a couple of years. And I mean, a legitimate standout player for them. You could absolutely see that with someone like Reese Stocksdale. He was kind of on the cusp of getting playing time at Ohio State several times. You saw him during the 2023 Indiana game at home. He was, or was it 2022? Might have been 2022, where it was kind of snowy and just kind of a crappy day. It was the game where Cam Babb had the touchdown reception at the end of the game. He was out there and he was returning punts. It was kind of a lousy day weather-wise, and he muffed a punt. And then, when you're a walk-on, you don't necessarily get a second chance to make a first impression in something like that. But, this was not someone who was just buried on the depth chart. This is someone who was close enough to legitimate playing time at Ohio State that, you could definitely see some bigger and better things for him as he heads into the transfer portal. So we will keep an eye on where both of those guys potentially land. So now onto the rules changes. And this is one of these things that, no one is ever that excited to hear about it. But this is one of these things that I feel like we need to do. It's like when we did the playoff previews last year and we kept telling you, kind of running through like all the different scenarios for the college football playoffs. So you sort of understood what you were looking at and what you were seeing and experiencing and what to sort of expect during the course of the fall. This is kind of the same thing where there's, none of these are like, oh, now they're playing by Canadian football rules and it's 3 downs and you can have 2 guys in motion towards the line of scrimmage no, there's nothing like that. But there are some significant rule changes. One that I think Ohio State fans were very upset about last year that is going to be corrected. That one, Tony, I mentioned earlier, sometimes you get a rule named named after you, and it's a good thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing. I will leave it up to you to decide whether the Dan Lanning rule is a good thing for Dan Lanning or a bad thing for Dan.
Well, it's always good to be known, I guess, as long as people are talking about you. But yeah, I think he probably takes it as a source of pride. Like, look at this loophole that I found, and then now they've closed it. and that's of course the 12 men on the field of defense. And if you get caught, then the offense has the option of putting time back on the clock, and it's something that I'm sure, knowing how much they look for loopholes, he is probably thrilled that he's got one that is on his name. And I'm not sure if he's going to have like a plaque made up for it, or it's going to be something hanging on his wall where it's going to be printed out. Like if you go with the entire rule that it's just put it out from the NCAA.com or .org, and he's going to be like, I did that. You know how Kevin Warren would have all of his degrees and his certifications. I think Dan Lanning is the kind of guy like, look at all of the rules that I've had changed because of me, and he'd have them all framed, and they'd certainly be like, yes, I'm the one. I am responsible. That is mine. I take ownership of that. Thank you.
Yeah, the next one probably this one doesn't have as official a name. I have my thoughts on who it could be named after. Uh, Definitely something that they're trying to address. I don't know how effectively this is going to address the issue that they're trying to address, but the issue of faking injuries, that was sort of a long recurring thing last fall. We saw it a bunch in the SEC when we were watching Tennessee games where it was just, half of the team would go down like they got shot by a sniper after a play. And it was like, all right, you probably don't all have cramps at the same time. But, they're trying to address it. We'll see how effectively they can do it. Tony, I'm calling this one the Lane Kiffin rule.
100%. And so the rule on this one is like under the new rule, if medical personnel enter the field to evaluate an injured player after the ball is spotted by the officiating crew for the next play, that player's team will be charged a timeout. And but what if the medical personnel don't ever go out there? Like what if you go down and the medical personnel just stay on the sideline? Like, come to us. Or you coach your players like, hey, after this play, get down. Like, because is this something where you send out, now quarterbacks get 2 plays and you choose the right play? Will the defense now get 2 plays? Like, okay, here's a play. After this play, you go down before that ball gets spotted. Like, there are workarounds around this, but at least they're trying to address the blatant part of this where it's like, I'm leaving the field. Oh no, I've been shot. And then you go down. So they're trying to address it, but there's no great way to get rid of this. This is a way to slow some of it down, though.
I think the real solution is to give the officials that magic freezy spray that they have for soccer players, where, speaking of games where sometimes guys pretend to be significantly more injured than they are, maybe you get the magic freeze spray from soccer and you're going to get sprayed. So if you don't want to get sprayed, you don't get the fake injuries. We'll see. Yeah, I think they're probably this is like a very noble attempt to address the issue. I don't think it's actually going to fix it. I think it's just going to look a little different next year, but we'll see how that goes. Next one, this is one that, boy, if you've ever watched an overtime football game, you're going to be so happy about this one. They are limiting the number of timeouts in overtime to avoid having head coaches ruin, what should be the most exciting portion of a game by constantly calling timeouts. I go back to the Georgia Tech game last year where it was, endless overtimes, and it just, you constantly had timeouts and it was so irritating. However, Tony, I'm going a little off the board here. Tony, we're calling this the Tom Izzo rule.
You beat me to it, Tom. I appreciate that. One of the worst Toms that I've ever heard of. Yeah, so this one is basically once the third overtime begins, you're given one timeout, and that's it for the rest of the game. So use it sparingly, and you're only going to use it once. So yes, instead of a timeout every overtime where, you know what, let's freeze a kicker, or let's do this, or let's do that. Now you get one, and that's it. So yes, they've made overtime worse, I would say, in my opinion, because I always liked the other overtime. I always preferred that because I don't mind watching a bunch of overtime football, but I don't like watching a bunch of 2-point tries. So this is good. getting rid of the timeouts, just giving them one timeout after the third, or in the third, I think is a good compromise for the overtime.
Yeah, for sure. Because what happened, I mean, if you didn't watch that Georgia Tech game last year, and this was not the only example of it, but you'd have the offense would line up with their play, and it's just you have one play, you just have to get a 2 point conversion or not, and then the defense would call timeout, and then you had to say, well, okay, so now we're not lined up, and we either have to have them know exactly what we're going to line up as, or we have to go away from what we had as our plan A for this most important play of the game. And you could just do that every overtime. It was incredibly irritating. So, yeah, that's a good one. The rest of them, we're getting a little bit more into minutia. So I don't even necessarily have specific names in mind here. If you have one, by all means, go ahead. But there is going to be, Tony, a change in college football replay, and it's really just what they're going to be saying on the field after the replay.
Yeah, no, there's no longer a confirmed or stands. The referee will just say that the call on the field is upheld or overturned, which is a complete cop out in my mind. If you can't say confirmed or stands, just getting rid of that is kind of soft in my opinion. But do I have a name for it? I don't, unfortunately. So no, we can move on. But yeah, I don't like it. Like why can't you confirm it? Why can't you say that you can't confirm it?
Yeah, that always felt like it was at least kind of, you could see if you were on the same page as the officiating crew, where it's like, yeah, this is clearly a the replay shows this definitely, or just, yeah, it's a little unclear, so we just kind of are defaulting to what we had on the field. That was at least a little bit interesting to me, but we're getting away from that. So, cowards, terrible cowards. We will know a little bit less, but ultimately the result will not be changed. Next up, I'm just going to kind of lump this together. Special teams minutia. There's all sorts of special teams minutia. There was someone. Now I'm now trying to think, because they're changing the rule on being able to just stick your arms out like a T and then to actually catch the ball. Someone did that last year and then caught the kickoff and ran it back because the opposing team wasn't ready for it. Now I'm forgetting who that was. So that this is named in honor of that guy. But then there's a bunch of other stuff that's like real special teams minutia, line of scrimmage stuff.
Yeah, like you can't have somebody lined up between the long snapper and the kicker or the punter, like things like that. And if you snap from the line of scrimmage, or if you snap from like the end of the line of scrimmage, that player, that snapper, that center is no longer protected. Whereas, if they're in the middle of the line of scrimmage, they're surrounded by their line mates. There's a whole roughing the center thing, the roughing the snapper. You you can basically you can rough the snapper if he's on the edge of the line of scrimmage, as you see all of these weird swinging gate types of things. If he's got it, so they've kind of done some of those things. That is part of that minutia. Um, that you mentioned the T. I was thinking, like, why not just do like a T with your arms? Like one arm to the other rather than holding them out, because that can be misconstrued a lot of ways. But yes, always trying to find a better way to figure things out and keep because there are complaints every year in terms of, hey, these guys are finding these loopholes, these guys are bending these rules, so they have to like make them more rigid or make them punish people for trying to take advantage of just all of these different rules that don't yet have boundaries that you wouldn't think of. Because Tom, I'm not going to blame analytics, but I'll blame nerds.
Tough, but fair. And here I am about to say something nice about you. The next one is, it's related to pre-snap motion and conversation, and the disconcerting signals. And one of my favorite tweets of all time, I think someone tweeted you that disconcerting signals was your high school band's name, and you said you were the only ones that clapped at your shows, which is so good, so good. But this is all about the stuff that what you can do and what you can't do. This is something that showed up a couple times in the college football playoff. I think it was the Notre Dame Indiana game, where you had a bunch of delay of game on the defense penalties that you never saw, and then you saw them in some really big moments. So they're working to sort of clarify some of those rules.
Yeah, and it's both sides where like the offense can't say two defensive terms, move and stem. If the offense says that, then there's going to be a delay of game. And it's we've seen the players that defensive guys, linebacker will clap to simulate the quarterback there, or a hut, or things like that. So they're just trying to accentuate those more and keep people in check on what they do, because again, everybody's looking for a little leeway and looking for a little advantage. And so, yeah, no player can call defensive signals that simulate the sound or cadence of the offensive signals. And basically, there's no reason for you to say these words. There's no reason for you to say these words. You guys just stick to your own words.
Yeah, so everyone has to stick to their own words and not, it's going to be like Pee Wee's Playhouse, where if you say STEM on offense, the chair starts going crazy and Pee Wee's screaming. But yeah, that's again, if you can avoid some of the kind of significant penalty calls that you saw during games that were consequential games that were like, you never see this called. So if you can provide a little more clarity around that, that's probably a good thing. So we will try to provide more clarity around what's going on with Ohio State football as we continue to cover the Buckeyes this offseason. I'm sure there is going to be more transfer portal news, both incoming and outgoing, in the coming days and coming weeks. We'll be covering all of that for you at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That's where Tony, Kevin, and I cover the team. Mark covers recruiting. We got our whole team of X's and O's gurus there all as well. Make you a smarter football fan. That is all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.